It's a quiet summer afternoon in Wales, June 23, 1942. At RAF Pembrey, a few mechanics are working near the runway when someone spots a fighter plane coming in fast from the coast. At first, they assume it's one of their own, maybe a Spitfire running low on fuel. But as it gets closer, the men freeze. The aircraft's wings carry the unmistakable black cross of the Luftwaffe. The ground crew scatter in disbelief. A German fighter right here, landing on a British airfield in the middle of the war. The plane touches down smoothly, engine still roaring. The pilot doesn't seem panicked. In fact, he waves at the British personnel as he taxis to a stop. For a few long seconds, no one moves. Then a young officer grabs the sidearm and runs toward the plane, yelling for the pilot to get out. The man inside raises his hands and steps down calmly. His name is Armin Faber, and what he's just done will change the course of the air war over Europe. Because without knowing it, he's just delivered the Allies Germany's most secret fighter. By the summer of 1942, the Royal Air Force was in trouble. For months, British pilots had been reporting encounters with a new kind of German fighter, one faster, deadlier, and seemingly unstoppable. They called it the Butcher Bird, the Focke-Wulf Fw. When it first appeared over the channel in late 1941, RAF commanders dismissed early reports. How could a German plane outperform the Spitfire Mark V, the pride of Britain's skies? But the evidence mounted quickly. Squadrons that once held their own against Messerschmitts were now being torn apart. The Fw could climb higher, roll faster, and dive away with ease. Pilots described it as a wolf among sheep. Every engagement cost more lives, and morale began to sink. The British needed answers. Intelligence officers scrambled for photographs, engine fragments, anything that could explain what this new machine was. But so far, no one had even seen one up close. All they knew was this: if the Allies didn't find a way to match the Fw soon, the air war over Europe could be lost before it had truly began. And that's when fate, and one Luftwaffe's pilot's simple navigational mistake, changed everything. Armin Faber wasn't a rookie. By 1942, he was 29 years old, a Luftwaffe officer, well-trained, disciplined, and respected within his unit, WW2 Fw. Named after the Red Baron himself, WW2 was one of Germany's elite fighter wings, flying the Luftwaffe's newest creation, the Focke-Wulf Fw. A3. The aircraft was unlike anything Faber had flown before. Powered by a massive BMW 801 radial engine, it was brutally fast, heavily armed, and incredibly stable in combat. For pilots like Faber, the 190 was more than a machine. It was proof of German engineering dominance and a symbol of national pride. On the afternoon of June 23, 1942, Faber took off from his base in northern France. His orders were simple: escort a formation of bombers across the English Channel, engage enemy fighters, and return to base. It was a mission he had flown many times before, but this one would not go as planned. Because over the next hour, a chain of confusion, fatigue, and one small navigational error would undo all of it and deliver Germany's prized secret weapon straight into enemy hands. The skies over Britain that afternoon were scattered with fast-moving clouds and the echo of engines. Armin Faber and his squadron of Fw. Had intercepted a group of RAF Spitfires near the coast of southern England. For the British pilots, this was a shock. They were used to facing Messerschmitt Bf 109s, but this new German fighter was something else entirely. It climbed faster, turned sharper, and hit harder than anything they'd ever seen. Faber dove into the fight with confidence. He tailed one Spitfire, firing short, controlled bursts, the 20mm cannons of his Fw. tearing through the air. The RAF pilot tried to break away, but Faber was relentless. Moments later, his guns found their mark. The Spitfire went down in flames over the Bristol Channel. But in the chaos of the fight, something went wrong. Faber, disoriented by the constant turns and identical patchwork of English countryside below, completely lost his bearings. Believing he was flying south toward occupied France, he actually turned north across the Bristol Channel, straight into Wales. When he spotted an airfield below, he thought he was back over friendly territory. He lowered his landing gear, circled once, and touched down neatly on RAF Pembrey, a British airbase in Wales. The ground crew sprinted toward the strange aircraft in disbelief. A German Focke-Wulf had just landed itself, intact, on their runway. The moment Armin Faber rolled to a stop, everything seemed eerily calm. He had no idea he'd just landed in enemy territory. An RAF airman, stunned by what he was seeing, climbed onto the wing and pointed a revolver straight at him. Faber opened the cockpit, smiled, and reportedly said, "I thought the airfield was German." He was immediately taken into custody, bewildered, embarrassed, but unharmed. Behind him, the British ground crew surrounded the plane in awe. It was the first intact Focke-Wulf 190 to fall into Allied hands. Within hours, intelligence officers swarmed RAF Pembrey. The captured aircraft was quickly flown by an RAF test pilot to Farnborough for inspection. What they found stunned the engineers. The FW-190 wasn't an improvement over the Messerschmitt 109, it outclassed nearly every Allied fighter in the sky. It climbed faster, dove steeper, and carried heavier guns. For months, the Allies had been losing dogfights without understanding why. Now they knew. Armin Faber's mistake handed Britain the key to understanding Germany's newest and deadliest fighter. And it had all happened because of a single navigational error, one that changed the course of air combat in 1942. Within days of Armin Faber's capture, his Focke-Wulf 190 was carefully dismantled, examined, and reassembled at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough. For British engineers and pilots, it was like opening a time capsule from the enemy's future. Everything about the aircraft screamed innovation. Its BMW 801 radial engine was a masterpiece, powerful, rugged, and easier to maintain than the liquid-cooled Merlin engines used in the Spitfire. The cockpit layout was advanced, almost ergonomic, and its wide landing gear made takeoffs and landings remarkably stable. But what really impressed the test pilots was how the FW-190 flew. In mock dogfights, it could outclimb and outturn most Allied fighters. Its roll rate was lightning fast, and it could dive away from danger with almost unfair ease. As one British pilot put it, "It's the first German fighter that makes you feel like you're fighting a machine, not a man." The RAF quickly began developing counter-tactics. Spitfire designers at Supermarine rushed to upgrade the aircraft's engine and aerodynamics, influencing the creation of the Spitfire Mark IX, a response to the FW-190's dominance. Ironically, Armin Faber's mistake had done more to help the Allies than months of intelligence gathering or espionage ever could. By handing over the Luftwaffe's most advanced fighter, he had unintentionally leveled the skies of Europe. After a shocking landing at RAF Pembrey, Armin Faber was interrogated by British intelligence. They quickly realized they weren't dealing with a spy or saboteur, just a skilled pilot who'd made an extraordinary mistake. Faber cooperated, providing details about his unit, his aircraft, and Luftwaffe operations. He spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of war in Britain, treated relatively well under the Geneva Convention. His captors even described him as calm, polite, and surprisingly good-natured, a professional soldier caught in a situation that was both absurd and historic. Back in Germany, however, the story was very different. The Luftwaffe initially feared Faber had defected. His unit was humiliated, and an official inquiry was launched into how one of Germany's top fighters could simply land itself in enemy hands. But eventually, reports from captured Allied intelligence confirmed the truth. It had been a genuine navigational error. When the war ended, Faber returned to a divided Germany. He never gained fame or glory, but his name lived on in aviation circles as the man who, by pure accident, gave the Allies one of their most valuable intelligence windfalls of the entire war. It's a story that captures the strange chaos of aerial warfare, where a single pilot's moment of confusion could shift the balance of power thousands of feet above the earth. The story of Armin Faber's wrong turn remains one of the most unbelievable moments of World War II aviation, not because of the dogfight or even the technology, but because of the sheer improbability of it all. A pilot lost in combat lands his secret fighter on enemy soil, and in doing so, changes the course of the air war over Europe. The Focke-Wulf 190 that Faber delivered by accident became one of the most studied aircraft in Allied history. Its design influenced the next generation of Spitfires and Mustangs, and the lessons learned from it helped the RAF regain parity and eventually dominance in the skies. For historians, it's a reminder of how thin the line can be between triumph and disaster. In war, every decision, every degree on a compass, can alter history. As for Armin Faber, he lived quietly after the war, never seeking attention for his infamous mistake. But his story endures as a strange, almost cinematic twist of fate, how one man's disorientation gave his enemies a priceless gift, and revealed just how fragile mastery of the skies really was. In a war defined by precision, it was a single moment of confusion that changed everything. Armin Faber's flight wasn't heroic or tragic, it was simply human. And sometimes, that's what makes history unforgettable.